A serial killer in Seattle has pleaded guilty on Wednesday to more murders than any other serial killer in U.S. history.
Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. This is Candace, Coffee and Crime. Today we're going to talk about a really real crazy guy. Y'all thought Sam a Little was bad. This guy don't have as much as high body count as him, but it's close. But he upped the ante with some of the things he done. So trigger warning, like for everything. Animal violence, everything. So if you can't handle anything from horror movies, turn this off right now. So his name's George Leon Ridgway, born in February 18th, 1949. He was convicted of murdering 49 women between 1982 and 1998. Now, I'll get into more details, but most of his murders happened in a 2-year span. This guy just went ape shit. 2 years. He murdered like 40 women. My daughter don't have to turn her phone off when mom's in here. So at the time of his arrest, Ridgway was considered the most prolific serial killer of his time. That was that time, and there's been several others since that they've said that about. I've said that, I think, about every guy I've done a documentary on now, though. But it was mainly because of his confirmed kills. Like, it was actually confirmed that he did what he did, not assumptions. But most of his victims were alleged sex workers or other women in vulnerable situations, like drug addicts and runaways, underage runaways at that. So, before his capture, media outlets nicknamed him the Green River Killer or the Green River Strangler due to his victims. The first 5 victims were found in the Green River in Washington State.
In Seattle this morning, police are hunting a mass murderer believed to have killed as many as 21 prostitutes in the last 22 months. David Burrington reports.
Been called the Green River Killer ever since the first bodies, 5 of them, were pulled from this river.
He strangled his victims usually by hand, but occasionally he used ligatures. After strangling them, he would dump their bodies in the forest or overgrown wooded areas and engage in necrophilia. Yeah, that was gross. So, which I'm going to get into more detail about that. This is Wikipedia's introduction. I'm just introducing him through Wikipedia right now. Ridgway was a suspect in the Green River case since 1982. However, they weren't able to link the murders to him during that time. But later advances in DNA profiling allowed investigators to definitively link Ridgway to the murders. And he was arrested on November 30th, 2001. As he was leaving the Kenworth truck factory where he worked in Renton, Washington. As part of a plea bargain, he agreed to disclose the locations of the still missing women in order to avoid the death penalty. So he just got consecutive life sentences for what he did due to the plea bargain. Now, he was born in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was the second of 3 sons to Thomas and Mary Ridgway. His childhood was somewhat troubled. Relatives described his mother as being a domineering woman who inflicted corporal punishment for the most minor things. She was they considered she was abusive. And she was abusive towards his dad, too, because someone recalled that at one point, Thomas had dodged a plate being thrown at his head. And instead of saying anything or doing anything, he just got up from the table and left. You know, that's what kind of person she was. Also, Ridgway, he passed that McDonald triad that I spoke with in another one of my videos. The 3 things that predict a possible serial killer, cruelty to animals, arson, and bedwetting up until they're, older. So, and he was known to, someone said that he had actually killed a cat as a child. And he committed arson at an early age, too. Don't know quite what year it was, but he was young when he did it. So he kind of showed signs right away. Ridgway was dyslexic and was held back in high school. He had an IQ of low 80s. He wasn't very smart. He was held back like 2 years in high school, so he graduated when he was 20. Now, this is when things get crazy. I'm going to get more into his childhood, but let me go ahead and talk about this. At 16, Ridgway lured a boy into Woodland and stabbed him through his ribs into his liver. The boy managed to survive, and he didn't get any charges on him. I try to keep things like in a timeline, but I'm going to be bouncing around, so I'm going to try to keep up with it with the dates and let you know, from time to time, timelines. But I read so many things, and I'm trying to remember so many things at once, so I'm going to be looking down a lot and trying to, so I don't mess up. I don't like saying the wrong things. I did memorize a lot, but I'm not going off of my memory with anything. I'm not going to risk it. Why did you kill me? The kindergarten assailant. It was a reasonable question. There hadn't been any altercations between the two boys. They were just two neighborhood children who had met moments earlier. The kindergartner had been dressed up as a cowboy that day, playing with a stick in the wooded area near his home. The teenager asked if he wanted to go build a fort with him. Moments later, the teenager stabs the victim with a folding knife into the midsection, punctured his liver. Blood flowed down the victim's side and into his cowboy boots. I always wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone, the teenager says as he walks away laughing, according to the little boy's testimony. And the stabbing was just a small preview of his life to come. Now, before the stabbing, let's get back to his childhood and what happened with his family. Of course, like I was talking about, his mother, Mary, dominated the household. Ridgway's father, Tom, he was just such a meek man, he didn't stand up to women. And as far as evidence says, he really didn't seem to have much of a central role in Gary's life, except for this. He introduced the idea of necrophilia to his son. He worked in a mortuary, and when Ridgway was a young boy, he often came home and told stories of a co-worker he enjoyed engaging in necrophilia at the time. And at the time, the story would become the subject of Ridgway's teenage sexual fantasies. The subject was interesting to him because having sex with someone who was dead, he wouldn't get caught, and no feelings meant that they couldn't feel anything, So that was his idea. Aside from his parents, the dysfunctional relationship, and his father's outrageous work stories, Gary's childhood was full of other problems. Chronic bedwetter in his early years, and when this happened, his mother would berate him in front of his siblings, make him stand in front of them in the shower or a cold bath, and pay particular interest to his dirtiest parts, which was his genitals. And she would do this ritualistic cleaning while barely having any clothing on. So Mary submitted to her son also horrific talks and events. She's been described as dressing very sexually provocative while at work at JCPenney's, and while she was in the local department store, while she was fitting her customers, she would describe how they would get sexually aroused by her. And she also mentioned details as of like the smell of their genital area. She was telling a young kid these things. It was strange, and Gary grew up, eventually as he grew up in adolescence, he began to fantasize about having violent sex with his mother. Like, he loved her, but he hated her. It was weird. He claimed he wanted to scar her for life by slitting her throat with a kitchen knife to relieve his frustrations at never being able to please her. He felt inadequate due to low academic performance. Stems from the low IQ. He was a poor student who earned a D average. His mother often spoke of putting him in a state institution for mentally retarded people, but she never fulfilled the threat. Instead, Ridgway eventually graduated from high school. Like I said, he was held back for 2 years when he was 20. His teenage years were filled with other warning signs of problems brewing within his psyche. He began killing animals. If I repeat myself, I apologize. Like I said, there's a lot of things to this. Setting fires and obsessing over true crime stories. He alludes to the fact that he might have killed before. He claimed that he was unsure of whether he did or not, but he had vivid recollections of drowning a boy in a particular lake. Interestingly, public records of that year showed 2 boys of having drowned in that lake. Another memory was when he stabbed a little boy. But he was never arrested, I was about to say, for that offense. So he had no record or nothing. there's a lot more to his childhood I'm going to get into too. According to one of his college classmates, he never had any issues getting girlfriends. And according to a football coach, he described him as a somewhat smallish child with wispy hair and nondescript. So, normal, I guess. And he had no juvenile record, despite the fact that he thinks he possibly killed somebody in drowning, and in that little boy he had stabbed. For some reason, he didn't have a record. Still, there were signs of the McDonald triad I had talked about, and because he had committed arson with bed until the age of 13, and he tortured animals, notably killing a cat by trapping it in a freezer. That's what I was going to talk about earlier, and I couldn't remember. I think the violence was always there. I don't know that we ever heard the whole story. The prosecution to his case said. She's the one, Prosecutor Eakes, she was the one who got him to do his confession. They don't feel like they feel like he held back and didn't tell everything. Gary wasn't the favorite child. That honor belonged to Gregory. He was 1 year older than him. He was widely regarded as the most accomplished sibling, having run for student office, later majoring in physics, and at a reputable college. Gary, by comparison, like I said, had low IQ and dyslexic. They believe he was dyslexic. For all the horrible things Gary did to his victims, the only time that she saw, this is what Eakes had said, the only time she saw him actually express anguish or sadness was when talking about his own intelligence. He was obviously limited intellectually, and the one time he genuinely cried was when he was talking about how he's afraid to get put on the short bus, a vehicle specifically assigned to transport mentally and physically disabled students at school. I think as a child, if someone threatened us that, being put on that, we would be scared too, because, man, talking about getting picked on, you definitely would have gotten picked on. I suspect that having a brilliant brother was a big thing that shaped him. Gary's the troubled one, not the smart one, and I suspect the big issue for him throughout his life, says Eakes, is perhaps being a serial killer was something that he knew he was good at and thought that he could succeed with. But however Ridgway felt about his siblings, the focus was the familial angst was clearly towards his mother, Mary. See, we'll get back on subject to her. He told the prosecutor he was sexually attracted to his mother, and that his arousal also triggered his hate for her. The prosecutor, Eakes, suspected that Ridgway was sexually molested by her, noting that he admitted to a memory of her washing his genitals after bedwetting, in his teens. So she didn't just do it when he was young. She was doing it when he was way, way, way. That was very inappropriate to even bathe your child at that age. And classmates recalled he received corporal punishment with a belt or a stick from both the parents over minor things. And Mary Winslow, a woman who was married to Ridgway in between 73 and 80, recalled that Mary yelling at Gary's father continually. So she was just miserable. She was a hard person to live with. Just mean. Like I said earlier, yelling, abusive. No one did anything right. So, and then here you are already suffering with the fact that you don't feel like you're smart, and everything else. And then possible sexual abuse along with that. I'm not saying he's right to do the things he's done, but it's a key factor in why he continued to do what he did. Why he didn't have any remorse towards what he did, I'm guessing. I'm not a psychiatrist, I don't know. But according to them, this led to his behavior. But there was a lot of things that he couldn't admit, even to himself, about what kind of monster he really is. So, he didn't. That people feel like he pushed down the abuse and blocked it out and didn't remember what his mom done. But there's a lot of details that show that she possibly sexually molested him. So as Gary Ridgway grew up, he began stalking many women in his neighborhood who have previously rejected him, holding a grudge. Eventually, he married Claudia Craig and enlisted in the Navy. Ridgway claims that it was during this time in the Navy his obsession with prostitutes began. After returning from the Navy, Ridgway promptly divorced her. Soon after, now, it's not stating it here, but in the Navy, a prostitute gave him gonorrhea. And I guess he didn't care because he went home with it and I guess gave it to his wife. And then finds out that she was cheating on him. So he left her because she was cheating on him, but he was sleeping with prostitutes. Anyway, just had to point that out. Soon after, he would marry a woman named Marcia Winslow, who in time would become his first choking victim. She later reported that Ridgway enjoyed sexual bondage and taking her to secluded places like the banks of the Green River to have sex outdoors. Like he made her do it too. Like she didn't want to, and he got her to do it, and against her wishes, she did. To please him. Anyway, ultimately they ended up having a son, and he loved that boy. He was proud of that boy, and but they ended up divorcing. Ridgway was ordered to pay her child support. He was so outraged that he contemplated killing her, even though he never did. Thank God for that. After divorcing his second wife, Ridgway began soliciting prostitutes more. He developed a growing hatred towards them. He felt rage that eventually manifested into murder, and when he felt the prostitutes regarded him with disgust and disdain, in time he stopped being able to have sex with a living person, so he would rape the still warm corpses of his victims. If he felt the urge, he would go back to his victims and brush off the maggots and have sex with them again. In his later killings, he would purposely dispose of the bodies farther from his home in other states sometimes, as to avoid engaging in the act of necrophilia. Ridgway claims he became disgusted with his own fantasies. My daughter made an appearance. It was during the time that Ridgway met and married Judith Lynch. He would commit most of his crimes most of his murders while he was married to her. That was the 2-year span, I think, that I was talking about earlier. The Green River case baffled Kings County residents and law enforcement officials for over 2 decades. When Gary was caught and ultimately confessed to his crimes, he was unable to give a precise timeline, victims' names, or even the exact number of women that he had murdered in his 22-year murder spree. Although his plea deal forced him to return to the scenes of many of his crimes, he was not capable of remembering all the details of his crimes. The Kings County Sheriff's Office was able to piece together events that occurred in relation to the Green River Killer, so as to provide somewhat of a timeline for this case. In July of '82, the first Green River body was found by children playing near Kent. The body was later identified as Wendy Lee Caulfield. Between August and 13th to the 15th, 1982, 4 more female bodies were found along and in the Green River in Kings County. So they were found inside in the river and on the shores of it. So the bodies were all believed to be prostitutes who worked along the SeaTac strip. The following day, on August 16th, 82, the Green River Task Force was formed. On April 30th, 83, the boyfriend of a missing prostitute, Marie Malvar, followed a pickup truck connected with her disappearance. The truck was coined the famous green pickup truck. It was Ridgway's pickup truck that he really loved to drive. So by April 2nd, 84, the Kings County Sheriff's Office linked at least 20 deaths to the Green River Killer. While the body count continued to rise, Ridgway contacted the Green River Task Force under the guise of wanting to assist and offer information. In May of '84, they started they felt like he was suspicious, so they did a polygraph on him, and he passed. Somehow or another, he passed the polygraph test. It's crazy as hell. But so the police had to continue leads and interview suspects as the death toll reached 42 as of December of 84. That's a lot. In those 3 years later, in April of 87, Ridgway's home was searched and samples of body fluids were taken from Ridgway, but the evidence was not enough to arrest him. By 91, the Green River Task Force had spent $15 million, pursued 30,000 tips, and logged in 9,000 pieces of evidence. Despite all that, the task force did not have a suspect. In 1999, new DNA testing was able to identify the remains of a 1986 victim found near the Green River. The evolution of DNA testing allowed officials to test other evidence. In the fall of 2001, Ridgway was arrested for the murders of 4 of the Green River killings through DNA evidence. Thank God for DNA evidence. When questioned about Ridgway after his arrest, friends and family described him as friendly but strange. His first 2 marriages ended in divorce because of the infidelities of both partners. And like I said, he was choked. The second his second wife was put in a chokehold. But Ridgway became religious during his second marriage, and he was prophesizing from door to door, going around telling people, preaching the Bible to people and stuff. And he would read the Bible aloud at work and at home, insisting that his wife follow the strict teachings of the pastor. And he would often cry after reading the Bible or hearing sermons. Despite his beliefs, he still continued to solicit prostitutes. And asked his wife to participate in sex in inappropriate places still. And the crazy thing is he was doing it where he took his victims' bodies. But according to the women in his life, he had an insatiable sexual appetite. His 3 ex-wives and several ex-girlfriends reported he demanded sex several times a day. And often he would want to have sex in public or in the woods. So that was part of his thing there. That's what they started finding out after he was caught. Ridgway admitted during interviews that he had a fixation with sex workers with whom he had a love-hate relationship. He complained about he sounded like his dad. He complained about their presence in his neighborhood, but he also took advantage of their services regularly. In a statement read in a plea hearing, Ridgway said he hated prostitutes and didn't want to pay them for sex. Some have speculated that he was torn between his lusts and his staunch religious beliefs. Okay, so before we get into everything else, let's talk about the murders, all of them. If I repeat some of them, I apologize. I'm just going through, like I said, so many different articles. So throughout the 1980s and 90s, Ridgway is believed to have murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women near Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. And Ridgway later reported that he has killed so many that he lost count. A majority of the murders occurred between 82 and 84, like I said, a 2-year span. And they were picked up, a lot of them were picked up along the Pacific Highway South. Ridgway sometimes showed the women pictures of his son in order to get them to trust him. They'd engage in sexual activity, and after minutes of intercourse from behind, Ridgway would wrap his arms around the front of them and their necks and use the other arm to pull back as tightly as he could, and he'd strangle them. He killed most of his victims in his home, his truck, or a secluded area. Most of the bodies were dumped in wooded areas, like I said. Not just the Green River, but Seattle, Tacoma International Airport, and other dump sites within South King County. There were also 2 confirmed and another 2 suspected victims found in Portland, Oregon area. That was the ones he took the bodies to try to not commit the act of necrophilia on. They were often left in clusters, sometimes posed, but usually nude. And he would, do what he did. Having sex with the deceased reduced his need to obtain a living victim, and this limited his exposure to being caught. He occasionally contaminated the dump sites with gum, cigarettes, and written materials belonging to others, and even transported a few victims' remains across, like I said, Oregon, not just for the necrophilia, but the fact that he wanted to try to confuse authorities. Now, his first known victims was a unique kind of, they identified it being him because of a unique spray paint that his company used. It was found on the clothing wrapped around the victim's neck. But the paint wasn't tested for 20 years. DNA evidence. If it had been tested at that time, it would have been easier to link him to the murder. But so what happened was the task force went and at the time Ted Bundy was in jail, they literally went in there and talked to Ted Bundy, and he gave them a clue as to how to catch the killer. Told them that they need a what was it he said? Well, he suggested that the killer was revisiting the dump sites to have sex with victims, and told them to check around the area for fresh sites and to, wait off in the distance, and they'd catch him because he'd come back and he knew he'd come back and dig them up. And he was right. He was right, and that's what he did. I guess that's in an interview with his wife, Judith Mawson, his third wife, in 1988, became his third wife in 88. She claimed in a 2010 interview that when she moved into his house while they were dating, there was no carpets. The detectives later told her that he probably wrapped a body in the carpet. In the same interview, she described how he would leave for work early in the morning some days, supposedly for the overtime pay. Mawson speculated that he must have committed some of the murders while supposedly working these early morning shifts. She claimed that she had not suspected Ridgway's crimes before she was contacted by the authorities in 87, and had not even heard of the Green River Killer before that because she didn't watch the news. Ridgway said that while he was in a relationship with her, his kill rate went way down. I think he killed 3 people during his marriage, and because he truly loved her. There's 3. Mawson told a local reporter, "I feel like I saved lives by being his wife and making him happy." I don't know if I'd feel that way. I don't know. I guess that she was right. But in 87, police had taken hair and saliva samples from him when they did the body fluids. And those samples were later what they used in connection with these crimes. So on December 18th, 2003, Judge Richard A. Jones sentenced Ridgway to 48 life sentences without possibility of parole to be served consecutively, due to the fact that he made a plea to avoid the death penalty, stating that he would lead them to the other victims' bodies, to give closure to the victims' families. He was also sentenced to an additional 10 years for tampering with evidence for each of the 48 victims, adding 480 years to his 48 life sentences. Later, he was given another life sentence after the remains of his 49th victim were found. Ridgway led the prosecutors to 3 bodies in 2003. On August 16th of that year, the remains of a 16-year-old girl found near Uniclaw, Washington, 40 feet from State Route 410, were pronounced the belongings of Pammy Annette Event, who had been believed to be a victim of the Green River Killer. The remains of Marie Malvar and April Butram were found in September 2003. On November 23rd, 2005, the press released that a weekend hiker found the skull of one of the women. Ridgway admitted murder in 2003. I actually have a small little ABC News footage thing. Stop talking about when the hikers found the body. I'm going to go ahead and play that, along with several other things that I found too.
Kids discovered a skull while playing in this Auburn ravine on Tuesday. Using dental records, King County Sheriff's investigators identified the remains of a woman who hasn't been seen for nearly 30 years, Rebecca Marrero.
She was 20 years old when she disappeared in 1982, December of 1982. We've long thought that she was most likely a victim of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer.
But detectives couldn't make the case against Gary Ridgway, in part because they didn't have Marrero's remains, until now. Marrero's bones were found close to those of Marie Malvar, discovered when Ridgway confessed to her murder in 2003.
One of Gary or Ridgway's trademarks was he would leave bodies, multiple bodies in one particular spot, at least one general area, 2, 3, sometimes even 4.
The skull of another victim, Tracy Winston, who was only 19 when she disappeared from the Northgate Mall on September 12, 1983, was found on November 20th, 2005 by another hiker in a wooded area near Highway 18 near Issaquah, southeast of Seattle. This was the find that led Ridgway's 49th life sentence.
In 2003, we found a second body not too far from where this one was found, Marie Malvar. In fact, he was tried and convicted in her homicide.
Marrero disappeared along this stretch of Pacific Highway in SeaTac. Investigators discussed her case with Ridgway years ago, but it wasn't included in the plea agreement that allowed Ridgway to avoid the death penalty by confessing to 48 killings. Prosecutors must decide if Ridgway can be tried if he's linked to this most recent murder.
They're certainly going to be looking at that agreement and looking at our case and seeing if he can be charged with this one, but there are certainly no guarantees.
Late today, Ridgway's former lawyer was asked if his one-time client could be charged or even face the death penalty.
I really don't think so. I mean, I believe she was the subject of the interviews, and he was made as many disclosures as he could regarding her case. So I like to think it's not something new that's going to reopen those possibilities.
In 2023, remains discovered in 1985 and known as Bones 17 were identified as belonging to 15-year-old Lori Ann Raspotnik.
It's a case that terrorized Western Washington for decades, but modern technology is bringing some closure to another family tonight. In the 80s and 90s, dozens of women and girls were found murdered in our area by serial killer Gary Ridgway, better known as the Green River Killer. An ancestry test helped identify this teenage girl decades later as one of his victims. This is Lori Ann Raspotnik, who officials once referred to only as Bone 17. In 1982, Lori Ann was just 15 years old when she ran away from home in Lewis County. Her family never saw her again.
Ridgway confessed to more confirmed murders than any other serial killer, American serial killer. Over a period of 5 months of police and prosecutor interviews, he confessed to, like I said, 48 murders, 42 of which were on the police's first list of probable Green River victims. So 42 of them the police had known about, and then he gave, 6 more. On February 9, 2004, prosecutors began to release videotape records of Ridgway's confessions. In one taped interview, he initially told the investigators that he was responsible for the deaths of 65 women. In another interview, he claimed to have murdered 71 and confessed to having had sex with them before killing them, in detail which he did not reveal until after his sentence. I guess so he was having sex with them before and after. In his confession, he acknowledged that he targeted prostitutes because they were easy to pick up and that he hated most of them, so it was easier to kill. He confessed that he had sex with his victims' bodies when he murdered them, but claimed he began burying later victims so that he could resist the urge. He started hating what he liked, But anyway, there's a whole bunch of... Ridgway was put in solitary confinement. He was moved around place, and he pled guilty. Even though he escaped the death penalty in the state of Washington, the possibility looms of a trial in another state where the death penalty may once again be on the table. They may not take a plea in another state. He killed, that's what happens, hopefully. But currently there are no plans for the trial of this sort, but the Kings County Sheriff's Office maintains that Ridgway is withholding information on more murders, and they will eventually get to the truth. So they need him alive right now. According to some news footage, he's got health problems. So I don't know how much longer he's going to even be around to tell about it. Hopefully they can dig in and find out more. But I'm going to be showing some interviews and videos and all kinds of things throughout this. Like I said, I'm sorry. I know I repeated several things. But I just kind of like to make sure people, I just make sure to, that it's rough. This was rough, what happened. If I find out any more, you'll probably end up seeing some more repeated things. Instead of reading out all the victims, I'm going to just show the list. I'm going to scroll down and just show you the list of women and honor their names and let you see. They deserve to still be remembered after all this time. But the final thing I would like to say is Gary Ridgway is facing all the life sentences. He'll never leave jail. But unfortunately, I don't think he'll make the death penalty because he's got health issues. And according to some reports, everyone's saying it's not true, but like I said earlier, according to some reports, he's in bad health. So I think his time's coming soon. So unfortunately for the victims, they're not going to get to see the day that he pays for his crimes that way. So, but he died in jail, so I guess that's what matters. I hope you enjoyed this. Well, I don't know about enjoying, but I hope it was interesting. The 70s and 80s, that was the time, wasn't it? Some crazy stuff. A lot of these serial killers were in the 70s and 80s. I mean, I'm not saying there's not any now. Like I just did one on Israel Keys. He was a recent one. But thank God for DNA evidence and forensics. He would have still been running rampant, living his life, wouldn't he? Anyway, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.